Good evening, brothers, sisters, and non-binary folks. Welcome to Race Matters. I'm Eddie Carson, and you are listening to WJOPLP Newburyport, Joppa Radio 96.3. And as I always tell folks, there's good funk and there's bad funk, and I think we're going to delve into the good funk, and I mean some soulful funk, particularly because I have just this beautiful, brilliant, empathetic, and soulful sister in the studio again. Marian, it's good to have you.
It's great to be back, and great to be listening to your intro, which is getting me thinking about all sorts of things. So I'm looking forward to the conversation.
All right, thank you.
And we'll try and make it as soulful and yet funky as possible.
You know what? And I'm down with that. I think that's necessary in everything. So should I call you Marian? Should I call you Miss Vest? What should I call you?
Marian is fine. Anything but too late for supper.
Too late for supper. And there's a bit of an inside joke there in terms of some of these prefixes. I had to constantly inform people on reasons why you can call me a lot of things, but you cannot call me Mr. Carson. There's just something about that power dynamic when you think of MR, which usurps MRS and MS and MISS if we're going to go all Southern, and we know MRS usurps MS and all the kind of dynamics within this gendered patriarchal construct created by men that really allows this Victorian sense to dominate our modern sense of how we should engage in conversations with each other too. How's that for pontificating?
I think it says in a nutshell what the nuclear family is all about. So I agree with you completely. I mean, you can't have capitalism without the nuclear family.
Right, absolutely. And I still struggle understanding what the nuclear family is. I was
a Victorian creation.
Victorian creation of nuclear family.
Well, it was. It's not like it's been with us forever.
Oh, I like to think of my family being made up of a lot of different folks: black, brown, white, indigenous, queer folks, straight folks, and we can go on and on and on. Asians, working class. I don't know so much about rich folks. I'll pause there. I'm not sure there are a lot of rich folks in my family. How about yours?
The same. But once private property is involved, the nuclear family becomes very important. So.
It does. I mean, really, that part of that is to protect the heritage of those who've benefited from the exploitation of others in terms of struggles. I mean, we can do a whole sermon on the problems of capitalism, and and it's interesting, right? Since I'm on this little, I don't know what the word is I'm calling this right now, but oftentimes, and I sit around and I think about the ways in which I'm complicit in the expansion of capitalism, right? In that own sense of guilt,
right.
Environmental degradation, you're right, exploitation of women, queer folks, black and brown folks, working class people. And when that guilt manifests in me and I start to go on this little pity party, right? I have some great comrades who remind me that I'm just a mere cog in a system who has to pay my bills, right? Pay my rent, navigate through spaces that I didn't create. Is that too radical?
That's the truth.
That's what I was hoping to hear.
Unfortunately, that is the truth. Absolutely.
Oh, hey, Marian. So before we get in, we're going to talk a little bit about Juneteenth because, essentially we have arrived. It is pretty much the month of June. Mm-hmm. And as we think about Juneteenth, one of the things that I've shared with folks before is I don't know when I stopped celebrating the 4th of July. I was growing up, we'd have the grill out, barbecue. We'll have all the black folks in the hood kind of congregate. My dad would throw on some ribs and meat, and he would overcook his meat, which is just, it's about as sinful as you can get in so many ways. It's one of those things where, I don't know, this was probably around 2005. I sat there and I started thinking about my graduate school work and some of my own research on capitalism and race in the Atlantic market and some of the things that I wrote about as I was kind of going through my own, not only my own intellectual, but my own pragmatic growth as an activist, as an academic, as a thinker, as someone who really believed in notions of radical love. And I sat there and I thought, why am I celebrating the 4th of July? The 4th of July is that old awesome brother with the great gray hair and a wonderful beard who talked about how the 4th is not my holiday, right? But it's the holiday for other folks, as it was seen in this manifestation of keeping people who look like me enslaved, keeping women who look like you oppressed and subordinate. And we can go on and on and on. I mean, I feel like I can give a sermon right now.
Yeah. Which pretty much Frederick Douglass, writing about the 4th of July, kind of did.
And I tell
absolutely.
you, and one of the things that we do here in Newburyport is there's a reading, right? And in a lot of communities in Massachusetts, they go through this reading of Douglass's, what is the 4th of July to the slave. I'm going to say this, and judge me. I'm okay with that, right? I'm fine. I did not know such readings existed when we think about the 4th of July, and there were community readings of Douglass's speech until I moved to Massachusetts about a decade ago. I had no idea. And to be honest with you, I would say not even a decade ago was I aware of this. I would say I only became familiar with these readings maybe 6 years ago, which is frightening.
Not really. I mean, I'm not sure how widespread it is now that you mention it.
Yeah.
But I think I probably became aware of it maybe 6 to 10 years ago, too.
Oh, so that makes me feel good.
So, no,
because, you're brilliant. And so that makes me feel really good knowing that.
I mean, unless I missed out on something a few decades there, which is entirely possible. But and I think it's something that in particular churches started doing. And it was the UU Church that I first heard about this as sort of part of their social justice education and awareness and so forth. And I thought, well, what a great thing. And then they had, in fact, one year I went and it was actually the community doing the reading by taking turns going to the front and actually reading it. And I thought, well, that's even better. It's participatory and small d democratic. So,
and I love that democratic flavor to it. I was probably back in 2020, I guess that's, 3 years ago now. I was invited to kind of give a talk and lead the reading here in Newburyport. And then we opened it up to a lot of folks engaged in that particular conversation that was there. And it was really eye-opening to me that people would take time out of their day to ponder and to reflect on the great words of Douglass, particularly for the fact that Douglass is reminding people that the 4th of July, the American Revolutionary War, the creation of the United States, was designed really to do a few things. One, suppress and eradicate mercantilism in order to give emergence to the rise of capitalism. And with the rise of that really came the focus on keeping black folks enslaved and growing the industrial economy within this country to a particular position or positionality that it came, and really came the dawning reality of the darkness of American history. All of this stuff is just in your history book, folks. We're not talking about critical race theory, if you're starting to think about that. We're talking about historical fact and truth. You don't need to hear this from my brilliant friend Marian or from me. Just pick up a book and read it. And if you still struggle with that, reach out to the two of us, and we're willing to have a conversation about that. When did you become aware of the crimes of the 4th of July, of the American Revolutionary War?
I would say back probably, because I'm much older than you are by a generation, I would say back around the late 60s, around the late 60s, early 70s, and certainly reading Howard Zinn's A People's History of the United States, which came out just about during that period. It would certainly have been one thing. And of course, This was in the context of the anti-war movement, the anti-Vietnam War movement, which sort of got me expelled from my family for about 2 years. It actually did. I was in college. I was supporting myself, so it was like it was okay. But that was how divisive and polarizing it was. We forget. Back then, not in the same way that it is now, but it certainly was polarizing. And so that was the time that I started reading things like Howard Zinn and, of course, The Logic of Withdrawal.
Yes.
That came out either in 64 or 66.
It was definitely in the 60s.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it was my freshman year in college, actually.
Well, so
I read it. Yeah.
So what you just did is remind me of the fact that when I was in college, when I was an undergraduate, I wasn't thinking the way you're thinking about some of the stuff. My own intellectual prowess and really desire to be a stronger activist and to engage folks in really understanding the crimes of capitalism, the crimes of even United States history, and the problems of race and why race does matter. Some of that stuff I was fully aware of. I was thinking about this stuff. I was doing some stuff, but I was still sitting around celebrating the 4th of July, right? Having fun. Open up a Coca-Cola around a grill and barbecuing and looking at the fireworks. And now I'm to a point where, and I'm not judging folks on this stuff because I have plenty of sins and skeletons in my own closet. But
don't we all?
Yes, we do.
Yes,
but one of the things, right, is that I don't do fireworks anymore. The environmental conditioning and the problems of that industry is just detrimental. Right, the fact that communities still do it, I get the whole celebration and everything, but yet we need to be a little bit more cognizant of the environmental problems there. And I can go on and on and on and on and on.
And even back then, I think. As we all know, it's a process. It's not like all of a sudden overnight you turn into a person who's like, oh, now I get it. I understand everything. It was the beginning. It's the beginning of it. And I would say that back in those days, insofar as I had much consciousness about the 4th of July and its significance, it would have been to be disillusioned with the way it was celebrated because it made it sound like we all benefited from it.
Absolutely.
And my realizing, obviously, that, this is disillusioning because we don't. And so there's the disillusionment period of the process. But then there's also realizing, and then coming to the point of like, oh, yes, but those great values about freedom and liberty and stuff like that, that's what we need to be embracing and having that be for all people. And while there's some truth to that, there's also a whole other truth that we've learned in terms of not just Frederick Douglass, but even Juneteenth, as we were talking about before. And of course, the internet arrives in the 90s, and, before then there was, the evening news with Walter Cronkite, and we stop and think about the Emancipation Proclamation and how long it took for that to get to Texas, 2 years afterwards, before it got there. And of course, how would we expect that it would? There was no Walter Cronkite to say to everybody, including black folks living in Texas, oh, by the way, the Emancipation Proclamation was just signed into law. And in fact, people were kept from it. And it wasn't until somebody came and sort of let the news out, and then Juneteenth was so there was that whole other layer beneath the whatever it is that you thought about the nationally declared holiday. And then you could also sort of say, well, if it's a top-down holiday, in other words, it was created by a bunch of politicians, usually for reasons.
White male politicians.
Yep. And to essentially kind of, act as a booster for getting everybody out to, buy lots of food and stuff like that and make it an economically productive holiday.
I mean, you bring up a number of points and stuff. And, one of the things we're going to get into this evening, folks, as we talk about Juneteenth, is how we celebrate Juneteenth, how we think about going back to the funk. I have a musical scholar, historian, someone who can really tell us a good little bit about what that looks like. But, as you were talking, I was sitting here and I was thinking, when I was in school, whether elementary, high school, undergrad, we didn't talk about Juneteenth.
No.
We didn't talk about it. We didn't talk about its meaning. Better yet, I'm going to go ahead and say, because I'm a truth teller and I'm willing to admit my own historical flaws, that the reality of Juneteenth didn't really come to fruition for me until I was probably just about out of graduate school. And then the work that I needed to think about in terms of Juneteenth, right? And just so folks know, Juneteenth, as Marian talked about, was the fact that this is when the enslaved folks are going to be freed on June 19th, 1865. This message, when it's going to arrive to Galveston, Texas by Gordon Granger, is going to bring that notice, letting folks know that they're free. And again, we can even debate for a long time, what does freedom mean? Freedom means, well, we escape one problem of this aspect of slavery only to go along to be enslaved through the norms and notions of Jim Crow. Then we can move forward past Jim Crow to the other elements of systemic racism and mass incarceration, and we can go on and on and on. Oh, by the way, folks, that's also not about critical race theory. That's that's historical fact.
And in fact, it's about music, because Chris Christopherson in his song "Me and Bobby McGee."
I love Chris Christopherson. Just for the record,
line, freedom's just another word for nothing left to lose. Nothing ain't worth nothing, but it's free.
I mean, it's interesting, Marian.
What a great line!
Because no, it is.
Whether it's Janis Joplin singing it or Chris Christopherson who wrote it.
Oh, you're talking about soulful folks that I do admire.
And she was from
love.
She was from Galveston, Texas, I think.
So I didn't know that.
Right close to there, yeah.
That is interesting.
Yeah. Port Arthur. She was from
Port Arthur. Yeah, right there. Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah. The we think about that narrative and that history, and we think about Juneteenth and how we engage and we celebrate it. I oftentimes sit around and I think about the fact that, we talk about the 4th of July and notions of liberty and freedom. Interesting, because I'm a black man in America, which means I'm political, and so I'm just going to go ahead and I'll drop a lot of political stuff. I was when I saw you at the bookstore the other day, I came across Ron DeSantis' book on the shelf. And it has freedom in the title. And I'm trying to sit there. I was sitting there and I was thinking, so how does someone who operates as an autocrat publish a book with freedom in it? Freedom for who are we talking about? Are we talking about those who've gained enormous privilege over a period of time, who continue to celebrate the 4th of July at the expense of those who have to really conjure up and think about why we need to celebrate Juneteenth?
Yeah. And perpetuate the old thing that as long as you're a good person and you work hard, then you will be one of the people who succeed and are successful and therefore worthy of freedom.
Oh, the lies of the Gilded Age and the Industrial
the meritorious
Revolution.
kind of, you worked hard and now you deserve freedom. And they don't say that, but they kind of, imply that that's what it is. I don't know, that it's for certain people and not for others.
We're going to have a whole show just on that word, freedom.
Absolutely.
I mean, we can go on and on and on when we think about this and everything, too. So here in Newburyport, we're going to celebrate Juneteenth. The DEI committee, they're doing some work in terms of celebrating that. And we here are going to do some things to really delve into that funk when we talk about what Juneteenth means as we try to advance the positionality of BIPOC folks, right? And why that's important too. So let's start off.
And one of the things I was just going back to what you were saying, because you were sort of doing a little confessing yourself about not having heard about Juneteenth. I hadn't either. I mean, if you hadn't heard about it until you were in graduate school, well, I hadn't heard about it until I was certainly in my 60s, and I heard about it in the context of one of these white folks having conversations about race in one of our suburban North Shore communities, and that was the topic one month was Juneteenth. So I did a lot of the research along with some other folks for that, and became aware of the fact, and of course you can look it up online, and encourage everybody to do so, because it's celebrated very kind of sporadically. And there are places like Milwaukee, Wisconsin that have huge parades that are like sort of celebrations of civic life. They have marching bands and
all of this for Juneteenth?
And all this for Juneteenth, and have been doing it forever. So it's not even limited in particular. I had heard about it only before that because Houston had a big blues festival, maybe still does, called the Juneteenth Festival. And I thought, well, what a clever word, Juneteenth. But I had no idea that it was tied to an actual historical event for the Black community. And it's later on when I started looking that Juneteenth, and of course Juneteenth is celebrated up here very differently from the way it's celebrated even in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, or in obviously Houston or places in the South. But even in the South, it's very irregular. I mean, there isn't like, it hasn't been until it has in this recent iteration become a true national holiday, and I guess here in Massachusetts now it's a true state holiday.
Yes, I mean it's two things to that point. One, I didn't know about Milwaukee, but I'm not surprised when we talk about historical phenomena, and you look at the Great Migration, and folks think about Black folks from the South who migrated to areas like Detroit, Chicago, Philadelphia, for example. Even some Black folks even managed to arrive in the Boston area during that migration. But Milwaukee, people don't think about, particularly because Milwaukee has been one of the great experimental cities when it comes to Black life. And there's a lot of sense of Black pride. You have charter schools, you have this, even the Panthers have some roots dating back to the, I don't know if I want to pull it into the 60s. I know for sure in the 70s that have created this sense of Black pride there where they start to think about this in such a conscientious way. But yet, you mentioned the South.
Yeah.
I'm from Montgomery, Alabama. We didn't talk about Juneteenth. Yeah. We didn't celebrate it. Today, Montgomery is probably about 56% Black, and I'm not living there anymore, so I don't know how they celebrate Juneteenth. I need to get on the phone and find out. But I don't, in truth, to your point, I don't think it's as pronounced as it might be in other, what I'm going to call Black enclaves here in this country.
Yeah. No, I think that's probably true. And it's interesting because you mentioned Boston and, because I think that in fact the Black presence in Boston, I wouldn't be surprised that with Boston, the same as Philadelphia, the same as New York, that it almost has more to do with the kind of maritime migrations that in fact predate the Great Migration. So I think that, obviously there were communities here, long before then. There were Black people living in New England at the time of the Revolutionary War and before that. And marrying Native people who lived here, who also were either indentured or enslaved, also during that same early period, much prior to the Revolution.
Well, you just remind me too. We started off by talking about Frederick Douglass, and if folks have not read much on Frederick Douglass, Frederick Douglass had a home here in Massachusetts for a period of time. And a lot of that even dealt with that maritime whaling industry, right? Where he thought there was a level of interracial connectedness that took place there too, which is really fascinating.
Yeah.
So,
and of course, W.E.B. Du Bois is from Springfield.
W.E.B. Du Bois, who's that?
Well, a great voice in the not just communist and leftist tradition, but and a great voice for obviously Black folks. But yeah, I think was from Springfield, Massachusetts.
Great Barrington.
Was it Great Barrington?
Yeah, he grew up in Great Barrington. He's a bit of a prodigy and graduated high school at the age of 16 and migrated to the Deep South where he did his undergraduate work at Fisk University, which I'm excited. I'll be giving a talk at Fisk this summer. I've been to Nashville a number of times, and I've never been to Fisk University, which is a historically Black college and university for those who don't know. And then you also mentioned Houston. So another thing I'm embarrassed to say is I lived in Houston for a decade. And I didn't engage in the type of blues and celebratorial Black traditions and culture that may be tied to Juneteenth in such a multiracial, multicultural city like Houston.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's interesting because Houston, we all know that there were individual cities, whether it was in Florida, whether it was in Oklahoma or whatever, where there were incredibly strong, self-sufficient black communities. Well, Houston certainly had that within it, and it was partly the Great Migration didn't just go north, it also went to other southern cities, and Houston was certainly one of them. And the strong blues tradition there was something that was not only local to the area, but it also was owned by black folks. Don Roby, who owned Duke and Peacock Records, which will be featured in the documentary Playing at the Screening Room, was black. And yes, he did engage in some questionable business practices with some of the musicians who recorded for him. But on the other hand, they gave us an incredible amount of music and people who were the major voices like Bobby Blue Bland and so forth in that tradition. And that's all from Houston.
So you mentioned the screening room, and
yes, now we should talk about those events.
I do.
Yes,
we have a couple very pointed things that we want to get to, and part of this is informing you, educating you, as I'm constantly being educated by this awesome, brilliant sister here.
As we all are.
As we all.
As I am from you. Thank you.
And so let's talk about the screening room, and let's talk about Corey Harris.
Yep.
Tell us about Corey. Tell us about what's going to happen as we engage in the celebration here in Newburyport of Juneteenth.
And I think that Eddie has talked a little bit about the fact that DEI and City Hall has an official wonderful thing that continues from 2 or 3 years ago now that will be happening.
I think 3 years now. Yeah.
That will be happening on Friday in front of City Hall with speakers and poets and so forth. And then Corey Harris will be will be doing one of his amazing concerts at the Belleville Church. And it's sort of a special concert. It's not just the Belleville concert series of Roots Music is one of the local kind of institutions. It's sort of built itself into something that's really wonderful. Then Corey is not just a blues entertainer. Mm-hmm. So, I mean, he's a great guitar player, great singer, and writes a lot of amazing songs. But he's also much more than just an entertainer. And they brought him in for, booked him just for Juneteenth because he's really an ideal person to do that. And he's a really stand-up person in that field who's not as well known up here as he should be.
Yeah.
And then at the screening room, we have When Houston Had the Blues, which is about that period of which I was speaking, which is kind of back in the 60s, the 70s, and kind of laying the not just the groundwork, but really the successes for traditional rhythm and blues. So in other words, prior to what we think of as rhythm and blues in black music today, but often sampled and used in hip-hop and in black music today. And that's from Houston. And this is a brand new documentary that's never been, it's won awards in places like Amsterdam and Paris.
And you've already really previewed, and you've seen a lot of this.
I've seen some of it, but I'm looking forward to seeing the whole thing myself for the very first time, because we're very careful about having people show it because of the fact that it hasn't been very widely shown yet, and it's easy for things to get out there on the internet. So it'll be a new experience for me too, and I'm really looking forward to it. I know the director, who has done a lot of amazing documentaries over the years, and this is Houston, and it's he's someone who's done a lot of writing about kind of the soul tradition and traditional rhythm and blues tradition in black music for British publications and in the United States too, as well as making documentaries and movies.
So if you had to come up with or share maybe 2-3 reasons why people should come and watch this When Houston Had the Blues, right? What would be some of those things that you would say beyond just to inform them and really hopefully let their soul come to life and all of that? But what would be some of those other reasons why people should show up, and not only just to celebrate, artists in the form and fashion and in the
And
work that they've
black-owned-
done,
and
but
black-owned
also
companies and so forth.
absolutely.
But it's actually, first and foremost, it's fun. I mean, the music is great, but it's also, for example, if you heard Elvis Presley do Hound Dog, well, if you want to hear the original rocking version, which is even, it's much better, frankly, by Big Mama Thornton, that's Houston music. So people like Bobby Blue Bland or Big Mama Thornton and just the stars of that period who, if you see them, you'll wish you were back then and could go to clubs and hear that music. And this is a lot of just really great footage from that time.
Has the blues struggled to find a foothold in Massachusetts?
To some degree, but not more than other types of music. There is.
And I could throw jazz into that too, and I'll say a little bit more about both of those. But.
Yeah. And what I will say is that in the past, meaning I would say pre-1970s, there was more support for quote unquote high culture. Mm-hmm. So like for symphonies and ballet and so forth. But since the 1970s and since, some people who started here and left to become successful and then were embraced in Boston, whether it's Bonnie Raitt or whomever, and who built on in sort of pop music traditions from that blues tradition, that has brought a lot more attention to it. And then whenever, for example, using Bonnie Raitt as an example, whenever she would do a song like "Woman Be Wise, Don't Advertise Your Man," she would credit the original singer, and in fact did shows with those folks, and in fact then revived the career of people like Charles Brown, which we had, whom we had the good fortune to work with. But yeah, so. It's a little sad to say, but for a while, I would say it was, college kids and white folks who, in fact, sort of brought back and rediscovered a lot of folks who hadn't been able to make a living playing their music. And then a lot of black people also started recognizing, oh, this isn't just poor, uneducated people's music. It has the respect of the larger world, and and frankly, it was always a part of jazz. And blues has always been a part of jazz.
Oh, absolutely.
Jazz has always been a part of blues. So.
My wife and I were recently having a conversation about essentially a similar conversation to this, and one of the things that I said was that I was concerned. I'm a blues man. I'm a jazz brother. Those are the things that I listen to. A lot of my students who I try to really introduce them to that, which is fine. They give me a hard time because I don't think I listen to any rap artists after the passing of Tupac and Biggie, right? So that, and maybe I'll throw Jay-Z. I kind of got into Jay-Z a little bit too, but I struggle with that stuff. And part of our conversation was the fact that when we think about, the blues in Houston and coming here and why we should celebrate that as a part of Black identity, Black culture on Juneteenth, my concern was, are we seeing the decline of jazz and blues? And then I say that, so hear me out, okay?
Yep.
I say that because to a point you made earlier, one of the things that allowed blues and particularly jazz to really to expand and to grow is because white folks listen to it. White folks love that stuff. White folks were really, even back when white folks didn't want anything to do in terms of being integrated with black folks, they like the music. And then what's happened, of course, is we've seen the rise of soul and R&B, hip hop and rap. All of that stuff comes out of that blues tradition, where we see a lot of white folks listening to that. And so where does that leave the culture of black folks when it comes to jazz and blues here in the 21st century?
Well, it's interesting you would say that.
And I hope you're going to tell me I'm wrong, but I'm afraid I'm not.
I'm not going to tell you you're wrong. I'm just going to. I think it's a slightly more complicated and a very interesting story.
Yeah.
And in fact, it's also a story of class. And for example, the equivalent among poor white people would be bluegrass.
Which I've got to tell you, I love bluegrass.
And it nearly died out. And the reason is very similar, that blues nearly died out with black people, is it reminded them of their oppression. It reminded them of poverty. It reminded them of their embarrassing relatives who weren't educated. And so when they went away to the city, they wanted to listen to things, whether it's countrypolitan, dreadful music though it may be, but something that they thought of as more sophisticated than the music they heard, or that their relatives played, or that they heard at, back home. And it's a similar sort of thing. And then, of course, what happened is bluegrass, this is an even funnier thing, was kind of too commercial for folk music, even though the folk revival kind of picked it up and brought it to those same college audiences who embraced blues. And on the other hand, it was not commercial enough for country music.
Which is just super commercialized.
Right.
Part of my struggle with country music is not that it's country music, it's just they have a same beat. It's like Nashville's the industry, and Nashville decide what is heard and what is not. I cannot do country music because of that. But
no, I agree. But think of being so caught on the margins or in betwixt and between that you're considered too commercial for one form of, white privileged folks who are going to college, and yet too not commercial enough for the people who are in fact making the most money, meaning Nashville and the country music industry. But it's a similar kind of thing, and then it survived largely because of similar people. And so I think it's always, in both cases, they've always been, and I think that that's their strength. It's always been minority music, and I don't mean minority in the sense of anybody's ethnic or racial identity.
Small.
I just mean, that's right.
Do you think that's good?
I do.
Yeah, I mean, hold on to some stuff. So, I don't know if I ever told you this or not. A few years ago, I started, my wife and I started going to bluegrass festivals. We would pitch a tent, grill out. Yep. We'd stay there for about 3-4 days, and we would listen to bluegrass music all day and congregate with a lot of folks. And the interesting thing, when I go to those places, this is not going to surprise you, I'm usually I'm one of maybe 2-3 black people that you will find in that spot. And of course, we always can see each other. We give each other that look where we're like, oh yeah, I'm not alone. It's kind of like when I go skiing. You see another brother up on the ski slopes and you start looking at each other and we give each other that look like, oh yeah, not many of us skiing on these slopes. Much like bluegrass festivals. So, I mean, why, you think about the roots of that, and bluegrass is I mean, I think I can say this, but I'm saying this from a positionality of ignorance, is overwhelmingly white.
Well, we're now learning more about the roots of bluegrass music, and we always have known that, for example, Bill Monroe, the father of bluegrass music, learned a lot about how to play from a guy named Arnold Schultz. When he grew up, he was from Rosine, Kentucky, Bill Monroe was. And Schultz was a black musician, like local itinerant musician. And so we've always known that there was that connection. But fortunately, and once again, this is the way it should be. This is how white people we have to learn about our own ignorance as well as our own privilege, is because of people like Don Flemons and Rhiannon Giddens from originally the Carolina Chocolate Drops and now doing their own solo careers, and people like Corey Harris. We've learned that, for example, as surprise record companies, the people that you addressed when you were putting out race records and the people you addressed when you were putting out hillbilly records, guess what? They listened to each other's records.
Absolutely.
And so black people also were a part of the origin story and the beginnings of bluegrass and string band music. just the way white people also listened to blues music and incorporated some of that sound in their music.
I mean,
So it's not as separate
Right.
as marketing and, the way the story has been told. It's much more complicated.
I mean, it was interesting.
than that.
You dropped the word hillbilly. I remember growing up, and I used to think being a redneck and hillbilly were synonymous. And as I became more attuned and versed, I realized that being a redneck and a hillbilly are two completely separate things, because there's actually black culture and tradition and black folks who exist within this hillbilly paradigm,
Yep.
right? And I don't want to talk about black rednecks. That's a whole nother complicated problem, because I don't think there are really a lot of black folks who are there, because it's kind of, ingratiated, white supremacy culture there. Whereas hillbilly, you're talking about the Carolinas, Appalachia, you're talking about the struggles and the music and a way of life. I think earlier you mentioned Elvis, and I don't know a whole lot about Elvis. I'll admit I recently watched, and I don't know, I think I shared this with you, the
that's right.
Elvis,
We talked about that.
yeah,
the new
Elvis
yeah.
movie, and there, I don't, to what extent were there problems with it or not. I
That
think
was shot in Australia or
I
something.
know, which is a problem there. Well, you just need to go to Mississippi, right? You don't need to go to Australia and
What's
save
the matter
yourself
with
some money.
Tupelo?
Exactly. The brother was born in Tupelo, right, and became a star in Memphis. But the reason why I was excited to see that is I was curious to see if the movie would promote the impact that black folks and black culture had on him. And I thought the movie did a good job doing that. You're more versed on this stuff than I am, so.
I think that the movie, in fact, may have done a little too good a job. I'm not sure.
Okay,
I'm not
got you.
In other words, they wanted to make the story into that, which is okay. I don't think it's quite as if there's a continuum. It sort of was a little didactic in that regard.
Yes.
And I'd like to believe it was like that. That would be wonderful, and that Elvis was just pining away to go out and have a soulful music experience with black people. But I don't think that was really what Elvis was all about.
Although, I'll say, and I'm like a lot of folks, when I watch something, I want to know a little bit more. And, I recently watched, I can't remember the title of it, Do You Want to Dance or something like that. It's the biopic about Whitney Houston, and which was really fantastic. And so I did a little bit of work to learn that Dionne Warwick was a huge fan of Elvis, and they even had a bit of a promotional relationship that Whitney Houston's mother performed and had an interesting relationship with Elvis Presley. So these were things
Yes.
I didn't know that. And
Yes.
so to me, it's always exciting to see white stars who have grown from black music. And part of that too, when you think about the fact that, Elvis was a polarizing figure, I think we can say that was true. And a lot of it had to do with some of that was his own issues. The other stuff had to do with black identity that he was really incorporated into his style.
Mm-hmm.
So,
Yeah, as opposed to what a lot of people have thought about Elvis and some of the other Sun Records white artists also, which is that they kind of the question of cultural appropriation.
absolutely, yes.
But on the other hand,
But I don't think it was cultural appropriation for Elvis.
well, it's hard to know exactly because it depends partly how you define it.
Right.
And frankly, most musicians, I don't think, would define it as rigidly as most people who are approaching this from more of a political point of view. And I think, part of the reason is, of course, Big Mama Thornton was happy that he did Hound Dog because she made a lot of money from that.
Yeah.
And, if you're a struggling artist, whether you're white or black or whomever, and your music is picked up by someone, even if they do bland versions of it, which arguably Elvis's wasn't, it's his own version, but not as bland as, say, Pat Boone or something
Right.
like that. Then,
Another whole conversation.
then
right
in a
there.
way it's kind of flattering. In other words, that's exactly right. And of course, that sort of people like Pat Boone taking and recording Little Richard songs but completely taking any element of soul or funk or anything out of it, that is really different from Elvis. So you're right about that. And as I say, it was sort of, money in the pocket for a lot of people.
So when we think about Corey Harris, for example, right? What can you share with us about him and the work that he's going to do here, his concert, and things that people are going to be able to, I can think of a lot of reasons why people should show up, but let's promote this.
Yeah.
Right. People need to show up.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, we want to get some people to come and sit in those seats and enjoy a really great show. And as he himself says, he's much more, he's not doing it just as, he does entertain you. He does bring a lot of information, but you're going to enjoy the music because it's top-notch music. He's a great guitar player, wonderful singer, wonderful writer. And he's doing it with, I think, not just I think, but I know, with a lot more consciousness than perhaps a lot of people, but within that sort of solo country blues tradition, he's definitely one of the best respected people nationally and internationally. So there's every reason to go and have a great concert.
Why are people, and again, I could be wrong about this, but I suspect I'm not again, why do you believe folks in this area are not as familiar with him as they should be?
Partly just that there, and I think that this is true for the Boston area in general. There are just fewer opportunities to hear that kind of music. There are fewer venues than there used to be.
Yes.
And I think that that's largely the reason. That and nothing more.
I start going to this jazz club in Portsmouth. I don't know if you've been there, and if you've not, we're going to go.
Jimmy's Jazz.
Jimmy's Jazz, and I really I enjoy it. They bring in kind of a diverse group of artists and everything, and I love the fact that all of them aren't white. Who they bring in, and this place looks like something that was probably you're finding like Manhattan.
It's kind of like the old-fashioned Manhattan supper clubs.
Oh, I don't know about this.
Because they have a menu and stuff like
that.
that.
Oh, where you can eat, have a drink, listen to the show. Which I will say, I
I'm not much of an eater or drinker when I go to hear music, but a lot of people like to do that.
Well, so once we went to listen to the cookers who were there, and I tried to eat my meal. It was a birthday thing. I had my drinks, and I discovered that I cannot eat food and listen and appreciate music. And I can have a drink and do that, and I can enjoy that all day. But there's something about eating food and listening, it just doesn't work. And after that one experience, I concluded never again. Never again.
Because then the plate starts bouncing up and down.
or you got to turn around, you got to eat, you got to listen, right? And in those settings, like Jimmy's is designed not to engage in, though they serve food, because I believe you should have a conversation around food. You're there to listen to the artists. And enjoy it. Oh.
Yeah, and Marcia Ball, who was just at the Belleville concert series a couple of weeks ago here, the last time I saw her before she played here in town. She's from Austin, originally from South Louisiana, and she heard her at Jimmy's last year. So yeah, they do have a pretty good lineup there.
I love it. As we get toward the end of this show, my friend, which is always great and time passes by quickly.
It does indeed.
It does. Folks who are tuning in, you're listening to Race Matters here at WJOPLP Newburyport, Joppa Radio 96.3. We're here and we're engaged and we're talking about, really thinking about, the historical construct of music and how that ties into black culture and black identity as we really encroach on the importance of Juneteenth and its history, which Biden made a federal holiday in 2020, I believe is correct.
I think so. And I think it might have become a state holiday here the year before.
You know what? You're right. It was a state holiday here because in 2020, it couldn't have been 2020 because he didn't come into office until 2021.
Right.
But in 2020, it was a state holiday.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
And that was the first year. And some of the individual towns, including Newburyport. Oh, and by the way, I did want to mention this. Unfortunately, I didn't bring along the information, but Ipswich is doing some things this year around Juneteenth also. So, you can go to both. I mean, check it out online. I'm sure you can get more information, and if we have more, we'll tell you about it. But so many individual towns across the state had passed the making it official to have an observation for Juneteenth prior to the state passing it. And then, as I say, I think the state passed it before it became a national holiday.
Massachusetts has its challenges and its issues and stuff, but Massachusetts has also historically been on the forefront of advancing things, whether it's same-sex marriage, whether it's, thinking about Juneteenth even before the rest of the country catch up. I'm going to go on and on and on and on about
we
some
still
of those
have a long
things.
ways to go.
Oh, no, we have a long way, and that's why I had that brief little caveat, right? There's no perfection here, and we can talk about that and some of those struggles that are there. So, my friend, as we get to the end of Race Matters, I never like to have the last word, so I have a couple questions for you. You are a person who's been in the music industry for a long time. You're a scholar, highly versed.
I'm not sure I'd go that far, Eddie. But
I'm going to push back, and I think anyone listening are blown away, and they would agree with me. Are you a electronic, cassette, 8-track, or vinyl person? What's your poison?
Well, my poison, I suppose, would be analog. So it's true that I do like that sound best. On the other hand, I like the convenience of CDs. So I still do like physical stuff as opposed to just listening to one track here and one track there. And like as you were saying about eating and listening to music, I tend to listen to music when I listen to it. I never put it on as background. I think it's kind of, well, first of all, it's very distracting. I want to do one thing at a time, and it's kind of disrespectful to the musicians. Here I am using you as music, and that's my own quirk about that. But aside from that, I don't really care what I could be listening on a funky little, boombox from the 1990s, which in fact is probably what I like best if I'm at home.
A boombox.
Just an old boombox.
I remember that. I used to listen to Run DMC. Mm-hmm. Back in those days when I had a boom box. Absolutely. Well,
so in other words, I'm not an audiophile listener.
Okay.
And some people are, particularly if they're really into certain types of jazz, I suppose, as well as classical music. But I like, listening to it in sort of natural settings. You can carry your music with you. You could listen to it a little while longer in cars. I understand that they're going to be taking away the CD players in cars.
Yeah, my car's
already have.
My car is old, so I still have a CD player.
Mine's old enough that I still have one.
Yeah, too. I have one. I'm one of the few people on the planet that I don't have. What do they call them? And my students are again shocked by this. I don't have a playlist. Mm-hmm.
No, I don't either.
I have vinyls and different stuff I'll listen to.
I just don't like it when you're going track by track on things like that and jumping around all over the place. I'd like to listen to something and then get a little more in depth with that artist.
We're going to go listen to music together. That's going to be a lot of
to go to Jimmy's.
Fun. We're going to go to Jimmy's. Yep. It's only right up the road, so I'm not making this up. Folks, thank you for chiming in on Race Matters, and we hope that you will engage. Here we're going to be playing a lot of soulful blues and jazz and a lot of stuff created by black folks as we celebrate Juneteenth on Juneteenth, which is June the 19th. Hope you'll show up to the screening room as well as to hear Corey Harris and
at
really
the Belleville Church on High Street, right here in town,
and really just take that in. If anything. And here's what I always like to tell folks, particularly white folks. I want to hear white folks engage in Juneteenth the way they engage in the 4th of July. And that is just not, it has not happened yet,
Yeah.
right?
No.
It's an afterthought. No one thinks about it. But I want people to really use this as an opportunity to meditate, to be soulful. And you know what? We're not judging. If you need to eat while you listen to music, hey, that's
Absolutely.
it. You do your thing. It just doesn't work for us,
Right.
but you do your thing.
And I want to talk you up a little bit too, because don't forget, at the screening room,
Thank you for the reminder.
when Houston had the blues, at the end of that screening, and it's a very special screening, you won't see it in any other movie theater, or in any other cinema society or anything like that. But at the end, the director of the movie, Alan Swire, will be in conversation with Eddie Carson. So Eddie will be there at the front of the screening room, carrying on a conversation with someone in Santa Monica, California.
I will, and I gotta say, I mean, I'm gonna do my best. You know, I'm not as brilliant as you
Your
are.
best will be. First of all, let me tell you, Alan Swire can talk. I mean, you'll be lucky to get a word in edgewise. Don't
Do
worry.
we got two talkers competing for space?
No, but the fact that you lived in Houston for a number of years,
Yes.
and weren't aware of Duke and Peacock, this is a great opportunity, and Alan is just the kind of person who will love to fill you in on everything that you missed, because partly you were too young. And,
No, I wasn't too young.
And a lot of this music had sort of gone by then. So,
Oh.
yeah. But anyway, so don't forget the screening room, but the Belleville Church, the observation of the holiday at City Hall on Friday, and we hope to see you there.
All right, folks, this is Race Matters. I just got the, I don't know, what do they call it when they're saying, hey, you got to wrap it up just a little bit, sign and everything, too, because we can go on and on and on. Folks, thanks for chiming in to Race Matters. This is exciting. We look forward to your participation in the Juneteenth festivities on June 19th. Be well.